what do you get curious about? You know, we've all heard that phrase, curiosity killed the cat. It also created some amazing CEOs. You know, if you look at curiosity and you look at the concept behind it, it's about learning something that you didn't know. And so from that lens, you know, people who are curious aren't afraid to ask. They aren't afraid to learn. They aren't afraid to get to know more. And if you're stepping out of your paradigm and you're breaking ladders and trying to think differently, I would really challenge you to think about how curious you are and how you're using curiosity to your advantage. I'm Katie Ostrico, and this is Breaking Ladders. I'm not sure why, but I have always been personally curious. I love to read. I love to listen to podcasts. I love to watch stories on real life. My team often laughs because a lot of those stories are about like serial killers, and I'm just fascinated by their brains, and I watch a lot about them. But I love this idea of learning about people and how they got to where they are. And I'm going to share with you a story of a recent book that I read, and kind of my walking through that with you. So everybody's heard of Albert Einstein, right? It's like the guy with the crazy hair who was a genius, theory of relativity. And to be honest, that was about as much as I knew. I took a year of physics in high school. I was kind of like the dumbest kid in the smart class. So for me, it was a lot of like, oh, what are the other people in the class doing? Okay, I'm gonna try to do that. So for me, I couldn't tell you anything about physics, about relativity, about any of the concepts. And so I wanted to learn more about how this really creative genius thinker got to where he was. So when I was reading the book and he came out with the theory of relativity, it was funny. He started to do these press tours because it was so different in terms of a theory that anyone had come up with. And everybody kept trying to ask him like, hey, explain it in one sentence and explain it in one sentence. And he's like, I can't. And I can't either. So I read through that section on how he came up with it. And in the biography, it goes into, if you're a good scientist or good at physics, you probably understood a lot better than I did. I tried to read it. I read it again. I just did not get it. I didn't understand it. And for me, there's two options, right? I could have just breezed through and kept going. But I was like, okay, no, this is a really big deal and it's going to set up so many things later on. So I have to figure this out. So I went and asked my husband, who was an engineer and took a lot more physics and is really good at that kind of stuff. And I said, hey, can you explain to me the theory of relativity? And he's like, no, absolutely not. And so before you judge, we've been married a long time, and there was a reason behind this because he knows me really well. So he said, if I explain it to you as we're sitting on the couch and I've got this book open and I'm trying to figure it out, he's like, you'll tune me out, 5 seconds in. You won't learn it because you're not the one trying to figure it out. And he goes, I'm going to leave 10 minutes later having explained it to you, and you'll have nothing. So he's like, you have to figure out how you're going to learn it, which is true, right? A lot of times you'll ask people a question about what they're doing and they start talking and your brain kind of heads in a different direction or it wanders off, which mine does a lot. And so it was true. I had to learn it. I had to be curious enough about it to go find other places to see if I could explain it. So I started reading, other things online. I started reading articles. I watched YouTube videos, including the theory of relativity explained to children. I even watched an MIT lecture on it to try to figure it out in my head. And I don't think it ever really made sense to me. I eventually kind of wandered away and moved on to the rest of the book. But for me, it was this idea of gravity in space, and it pulls things in space and draws things together. I had enough of a concept going through all this to be able to understand why it was so different than anything else. And I'm probably super way off. So if you're a science person, I apologize. But for me, the curiosity of it it's not anything that ever related to my work. It's not anything I do today, but I was curious about the person. I was curious about their theory, and I wanted to be able to understand it enough so that it made sense to me. And so when I think of curiosity as a strength in leadership, it's not about being curious just about business things or leader things. It's about working through a process to uncover something new and being curious enough to try to figure out what you're going to do to learn that. So I got my MBA a couple years after I graduated from college, and I'll be honest, the only reason I did it is because I had a company that would pay for it. But it connected me with the local university in town where I got my degree. And so I've had the chance to go back and speak at their alumni week to different classes. They'll bring alumni into the room to, share with kids like, here's the real world and what happens. And so I want to share with you about a time where I was sitting in a management class and I was speaking at the end of the class. So I kind of got to sit through, a shortened version of a management class. And it really stuck with me because I'm like, oh, this is somebody that if they actually weren't a professor and they were out, in the business community, would be terrible at management. They'd be somebody that nobody would want to work for. And it really breaks down to this idea of how you think about people and how curious you are. So he was up there talking, and as he's talking, I'm like, this guy has never really worked with other people and teams in a way that's constructive like we do every day. Because he kept using the word subordinate when talking about people. Well, they're your subordinates, and you have your subordinates do this. You have your resource do this. Like, wow, could you dismantle a person quicker by just calling them a subordinate or a resource? And so I could feel myself getting mad. I was sitting in the back of the room and I was really getting mad about this because I'm like, I really hope this is not what this guy is teaching these people, because quite honestly, if you're dumb enough to think of your people as subordinates, you kind of get whatever you get as a manager. Like, if you're dumb enough to hire people that you feel are inferior to you and you treat them that way and you keep them that way, yeah, you're not going to last that long. Have you ever been in a meeting where somebody's like, we just need a body? Just throw somebody at it. It's like, no, we need these types of things and qualities and personalities and character. It's never a resource or a body or a subordinate. So I got up in front of the class, and I tend to be a little bit outspoken. And so I basically said, looking at the class, and then I looked over at this teacher and I said, if you are ever dumb enough to hire subordinates or think of people merely as resources, like you do a machine that are replaceable, good luck, ever keeping people, because it will not happen. And the analogy that I use a lot when there are people on my team that step up into leadership for the first time, it's like this transition from being on the field to being a coach on the sidelines. And oftentimes, if you look at, football coaches in general, they weren't the best players on the field, but a lot of them became the best coaches. And as your job as a coach, you can't kick a ball, you can't catch a pass, you can't, do anything on the field to move anything. All you can do is build the strategy and the plays and the direction and put the right people in the right seats so that they can do that. That's really what leadership is. And so for me, I want the most talented group possible on the field. I want as many amazing players as I can who can do what they do every day. And my job is just to help them figure out the pieces and put it together, And so for me, with my team, they know I'm not the most open personally about my personal life. And sometimes I don't ask them a ton of questions about that, because a lot of times I don't want them to ask it back, and I tend to be pretty private. But when they come to me, I always listen, hopefully thoughtful and empathetic about things, because you get a lot of stuff that's outside of work that people will come to you with. And for me, my goal is to get to know my whole team and to know who they are and what they care about and where they want to go. Because for me, I don't just want subordinates or resources or bodies running around. I want a really great team, and I want to be curious about what that is with them so that I can figure out what's next. So one of the reasons this is super critical in leadership that nobody tells you is when you step into that first leadership or executive role, you move from feeling like an expert to a total novice, beginner starting from grade 1. You move back to this, I don't know anything about what's going on. And it can be really jarring to the system, especially if you were a really top performer in the role before, and now you've stepped into something that you're like, I I don't know how to do this. So my background was in marketing. Marketing is really broad. It was really in product marketing and product development. But I've managed engineers, I've managed graphic design, I've managed customer service, I've managed social media, I've managed sales. I've worked in a lot of industries where I didn't know anything about the industry before I first walked in. I've migrated from, office furniture to conveyor belts to like metal siding and metal trim on your house. And so I had to be curious because I wasn't walking in a lot of cases with any knowledge whatsoever. So, I had to be curious about the people, about the culture, about the team. What was I missing? What were the things that weren't said? What was the team missing? How do I think differently about our customers? I spent a lot of time with my leadership peers to try to understand it through their lens, spend a lot of time with my team. And I was really never afraid to ask a question. And I think at the end of the day, when you tie that curiosity to leadership, it's about getting rid of this fear that somebody might know, oh my gosh, you don't know something. Like they assume, hopefully they assume we don't know everything. But by asking questions and let that person share what they think and be the expert on the topic, you're building connection, you're building that relationship, you're creating that open dialogue that you're gonna want later, and you're curious about what they think. Doesn't mean you're always gonna agree with them. That's not what that's about, but you need to understand the points of view as much as possible. It's kind of like clues at a crime scene. You want as many as you can to try to figure out in the end what direction you're going to go. So I'll share with you a story in my current role. So I took on the role of sales and marketing in an industry I didn't know anything about, which was building products. So did I know anything about it before I started? No. Do I still learn something every day about it? Yeah, because there's so many nuances to it. Every little city has their own taste and feel and preference, and it's extremely diverse, which makes it challenging but also very interesting. So the first week I was sitting down with my boss, who was the president of the company who hired me, and we were walking through product. And he's a product guy, he's a marketing guy, he's really innovative in that space and very passionate, especially about certain categories of products. And so he probably thought I was more advanced than I was in the space, and kind of quickly realized oh no, she has no idea what any of this stuff is. So he started off by saying, okay, you know what soffit is, so let's talk about how we think about soffit. And I knew I had heard the word soffit, just through language, but I didn't have any clue what he was talking about at all. And so he kind of continued down this path for a minute, and I'm just looking at him, and he didn't really know my body language back then enough to stop and go why are you looking at me like that? What's going on? And I knew this was really important because of how much he was talking about it. And so I had two choices, right? I could nod and pretend that I understood something and kind of covered for that, or I could say, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so I chose the second path. So I raised my hand, was like, what is soffit? And he kind of laughed. He joked later. He's like, did you even look at the website before you started working here? And I'm like, yeah, a little bit, but I didn't study it that much. And so, what he did was he just broke it back down. And he's like, here's what it is. Here's why it came about. Here's the history. Here's how it got here. Here's the challenge I saw. Here's how our company innovated. Here's how we think differently about it. Other people think of it this way. We think of it this way. And I never had any fear of asking a question. I never had any fear of saying, I don't understand. I didn't have to understand everything. But you have that fear walking in, right? You're like, first day, I'm not going to start going, I don't know anything about our products that we sell or what we do here. But the alternative was I could have just faked it and been further behind, because I would have had to go figure it out on my own, and it wouldn't have been explained easily to me, and I wouldn't have understood the context of how we think about it if he had just kind of gone past it. And having that history has been very helpful for me to think about how we think about that now as our team's running with it. So, even at that senior level, there is sometimes this little inkling of should I ask if I don't know? It's you should totally ask if you don't know. And, unless it's something that's been explained to you 15 times and you still don't get it, which sometimes can happen, if it's stuff you don't know about and it's not your background, just ask. Be like, I don't understand. Can you walk me through that? Like I didn't know anything, because I don't know what you're talking about. And people will pause and walk your way through it. because they want to help you understand it from your point of view and their point of view. So here's my challenge to you. As you start, the next month or two, figure out something that you're curious about. Business-wise, personal-wise, some random serial killer that you want to know how they got to where they got. Whatever it is that, is interesting to you, figure that out. Like, write it down. Be like, I'm curious about this. I'm curious to learn about a guy like Albert Einstein. Heard a lot about him. I'm kind of curious about him. And then figure out how you're going to learn about whatever that topic is. Are you going to take a master class? Are you going to watch YouTube? And then take time out of your week to do that. Make sure you're being purposeful to spend time to learn. We do a lot of reading on our team, and our culture is just kind of around reading. A lot of people read books. We're always trading books and talking about books, and we'll give out books at sales meetings, which I don't know if the team actually reads, but we all read them. We use that as a way to get ideas and information. We'll read a couple different books on a topic and go, okay, how does this relate to us? And make sure you're talking about what you're reading or what you're learning. Socialize that with your friends, with your coworkers, with your significant other. And as you think about getting into that mindset, that's one of the things that a lot of really great leaders of large organizations do. They're always learning or reading or thinking and taking that time, to really break down those paradigms that you step into this role and everything. So, life is interesting. There's a lot of life out there. There are a lot of things to be curious about. And having that curious mindset and just trying to find those ways to think differently and see the world differently and see it from a different perspective, will make you stronger and better as you deal with people of all walks of life. So I just want to thank you for listening today, to be curious enough about this topic, to give it a listen and be curious enough about some of my stories. We'd love to hear and connect. That's my goal for this, is not to have it be a one-way dialogue, but to hopefully have it be a place where we can connect and talk and learn from each other. You can find me on Breaking Ladders at Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. You can email me directly with questions, comments. I'd love to know what you think at breakingladders2, the number 2 at gmail.com. And we have a podcast that you can subscribe to as well if you want. That's on all of the different podcast channels, Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon. I'd love to know what you're curious about, especially as it relates to business and career. If there's something that you're curious about that you want me to talk about or dig into or share some of my thoughts on it, I'd love to know what that is. So I'd love to connect with you. I'm excited to talk about this topic. I'm excited and curious to learn about you. And if there are things that you want to hear for future episodes, I'm curious to know what those are. And I can't wait to connect.